Hi, my name's Mark. I'm one of the pastors here at Trillium. The Trillium mission is to awaken the Christ light in each other and shine it in the world. And I got thinking recently, what would happen if someone in the church here actually woke up in a really profound way? They really, really woke up. And all of a sudden they had insight into life, into the way the world worked, into the way that the natural universe unfolded, into the dynamics of God in life. And they were able to demonstrate this through acts of miraculous power. What would the rest of the congregation do? Would we celebrate this? Or would we say something like, well, I know your history. I know where you came from. I know what you're about. I know who your parents are, what kind of work you've done in your life. And I just don't think this is real. I don't think this is something I can really trust. See, that's what happened to Jesus. He goes back to his hometown after doing the tour of Galilee. And while the people have heard these great stories about him, when he gets home, they ultimately get scandalized by him. They know his father, they know his mother, they know his brothers and sisters, they know what he was like when he grew up in Nazareth, and they just can't go along with him. And they close off their hearts to him, and it says at the very end, he wasn't able to do many acts of healing of power because of their lack of faith. There's a great story about Mozart. It goes back to 1630 originally. This Italian composer, he writes this piece of music just meant only for the Sistine Chapel. And there's a ban on its publishing. And every pope since that 1630 will not let this piece be published. It's only to be performed twice a year in the Sistine Chapel, which is the Pope's personal chapel. And it's not to be performed anywhere else in the world. And anybody who publishes this work will be excommunicated. And for 140 years, no one knew how to make sense of this music. There was no score to work from. And then there's 14-year-old Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and he's with his father, and they're in the service listening to the music. And that afternoon, Mozart goes home and he writes out all the parts, note for note perfect. It's a 14-minute piece. It's this dense Renaissance polyphonic music. In fact, I've got a link here for you. Just take a click on there and listen to the music, and then come back and we'll talk a bit further about it. Great. Now you know what I'm talking about. Musicologists today cannot explain the genius that allowed Mozart to do this. In fact, brain researchers, neuroscientists, philosophers have no way of explaining how Mozart could listen to this piece once, this dense, rich music, and be able to actually transcribe it down note for note perfect. The Pope was so impressed by Mozart, he actually invited him to come back to Rome, and instead of excommunicating him, he actually celebrated his genius, his musical genius. Genius is actually something that really frustrates modern research, frustrates psychologists, neuroscientists, neurophilosophers, because we can't really account for what goes on in genius activity. I've been reading a book called Irreducible Mind, and it's about a book written by some very highly respected psychologists, neuroscientists, and neurophilosophers, whose main point is that you can't reduce consciousness simply to a physical mechanism, neurons firing. There's just too much data and there's too much empirical evidence to be able to ultimately explain how things like genius function without, in a sense, going outside the boundaries of physical mechanism. Mozart said that he woke up in the morning with the music already in his head. It wasn't based on laborious work on his part. I'm sure he did put a lot of work in refining what he heard, but he was connected into something. He was connecting into some other realm, some other reality, and the music was coming to him, and he was writing it out. And I certainly am one that's convinced that you cannot explain the genius of Mozart's music making simply on the basis of neurons firing while he's sleeping. There's elements of consciousness that ultimately fall outside the boundaries of physical mechanism. For instance, near-death experiences. There's no way of explaining near-death experiences through simply a physical, mechanical understanding of consciousness. The brain is dead. It doesn't have any electrical circuits going through it. There's no brain function at all, and yet people have consciousness. We can't explain mystical experiences or out-of-body experiences or lucid dreams or apparitions or deathbed visions or even basic hypnotic states. They're unexplainable in simply physical mechanisms. And that's what the authors of An Irreducible Mind want to bring to our attention. It's really important for us to understand that there's so much of human experience that falls outside simply a physical, mechanical process. When we look at Jesus, we see the master genius of consciousness at play in life. He understands life in a way that almost none of us do. Probably nobody does. Nobody has, maybe no one ever will, I don't know. But he understands the interlinking of consciousness, the connections between spirit and healing, between body, and he teaches from this place and he manifests it in his life and the way that he goes about healing people. And when he goes home to his town, they can't deal with it, they can't explain it, and they dismiss him. And I think that happens not only with Jesus, it happens with God, the God power in our lives. We can't explain it, we don't understand it, so it's so easy for us to simply dismiss it, to put it out of sight and out of mind of our daily thinking. But we need to understand that there's aspects of consciousness that are not reducible to easy explanations, but that doesn't make them any less real than they are. They're in fact profoundly real. And our task in life is not simply to discriminate against them on the basis of our own limited understanding. Are we to dismiss Jesus off the side because we ultimately can't bring the same kind of healing into play in life? Wouldn't it be more helpful to us if we actually humbled ourselves and sought to learn the knowledge and wisdom that Jesus himself had? I'm thinking about a young woman that was in the hospital recently in a really sick circumstances, and I so desperately wished that I had Jesus' knowledge and understanding to bring healing to her. The fact that I don't have that knowledge doesn't mean that in fact the reality that Jesus manifested isn't real. I need to commit myself to learning what Jesus knows, and in fact to open my heart and mind to the power of God and allow it to work in a way that goes beyond my limited understanding. Our consciousness, our understanding, our consciousness is just a small slice of the total reality of life. In the same way that light, visible light, is just a small spectrum of the total electromagnetic spectrum of total light. You know, there's ultraviolet and there's infrared and the whole spectrum in between. And that's true for consciousness. Let's open our hearts and minds to the true power of our Creator. Let God manifest his way of miraculous power making in our lives so that we can do God's will. And let's get ourselves out of the way so that we can be that true conduit, the channel of divine peace and love. Go in that peace and love. Be God's channel. Let the mind and heart of God make its life known through you.